If a script does not make sense, a director either has to change it, which is their call. They're the director. If they're not happy with the screenplay, they got to make it work. Or if the writer doesn't want it to be changed, and or for some reason the producer's like, no, but we need an action scene, then it's up to the director to then, okay, through my direction, I will fill in what the writing isn't covered. In essence, if there was nothing to read between the lines, you've got to put something beneath the lines or in between the lines. So in the last video, I discussed how the beginning of Blade 2, which is very beautiful, starts off with Blade mowing down vampires with his weaponry, and he's killing them very quickly because ultimately he's just trying to find his mentor, who he believed was dead but found out he's a vampire and has essentially been a prisoner of the vampires for years. And so he's mowing all of these vampires down very quickly because all he wants to do is rescue his mentor and cure him of his vampirism, which, if you watch the first Blade, there is a cure for becoming a vampire developed by the end of that movie. Spoiler alert. I guess it doesn't count if you say spoiler alert afterward. But anyway, yeah. So that's so right from the beginning, there a story is being told, right? Like the action is very fast because the character has a specific intent. He needs to get somewhere as fast as possible to rescue someone he cares about most. And then I discussed the next action sequence, which Del Toro describes as a dance scene. Del Toro's approach to action movies is that action is just dance in disguise, much in the way people talk about comedy as drama in disguise, meaning there's still drama, it's just dressed up in a way that makes you laugh at it. So if you look at action through Guillermo del Toro's eyes, and look, Guillermo del Toro is the guy who made Pan's Labyrinth, which blew everyone's minds. But I was fortunate enough to see Blade 2, because I'm a little blockbuster dude, and then watch Devil's Backbone. So I already knew from Blade 2 and Devil's Backbone that this guy is an amazing filmmaker. And when he makes something, you need to pay attention. If you're a filmmaker, if that's your passion, that's your dream, then you need to pay attention to when someone like Guillermo del Toro makes choices in a movie. There's no point in calling yourself a director and going out there and making stuff if you're not going to at least take the time to do some homework and actually understand what real directors who achieve the industry standard are out there doing. So Del Toro, when he's talking about the second action scene, there's Blade returns with Whistler, he gives him the vampire cure, and all of a sudden these two ninja vampires sneak into their base, their little hideout. And when they drop down, what happens is Whistler shoots at them. And then to defend themselves, one vampire disarms Whistler and Blade engages the other vampire, and then it becomes this little sword fight between the two of them. And across the fight, you can tell from the physical nature of the second vampire that she's a woman, but you're only seeing her physique. But at the same time, their fight is very different. Their fight moves are a bit slower, not slow, but their fight moves, it's more of a sparring session. They're having a little bit more fun with each other. They're sizing each other up. And by the end of the fight scene, both Blade and Nisa, it turns out it's the vampire princess Nisa, have their swords at each other in a killing blow. So even though Blade has his sword at her neck, she has her sword at his groin. Both of these, the fight ends with them at a stalemate. And then the first vampire who disarmed Whistler calls for the violence to stop and says, "We're here to deliver a message." And Del Toro, when he reads the script for this, there's no Whistler shooting first and the disarming and all that. When he read the script, the vampires just show up and there's a fight. And Del Toro was like, this does not make sense. Why is this happening? The vampires show up to deliver a message, but they engage in this whole fight. And so, out of direction, Del Toro is the one who decided, okay, we're gonna have our heroes shoot first, and that way it's gonna motivate the vampires to act or react, and it's just going to accelerate things. So right there, as a storyteller, Guillermo del Toro, he knows the action scene's supposed to be there. People want this action scene, and he knows it's going to play a part in the romantic angle later on, because it's built into the fight from the screenplay, Blade versus Nisa. So he's like, okay, well, if the goal of the fight scene is to make these two interested in each other, and if that's really kind of what's going on, then, but how we get into the fight scene still needs to make sense. They can't, if they're here to deliver a message, why are they just attacking? That makes no sense at all. So from a point of view of direction, Whistler's going to shoot first. The vampire will disarm him and then put his gun on him, which immediately, already we know Blade killed a bunch of vampires just to save Whistler. So now Blade will engage to protect Whistler, and Nisa will engage Blade, because knowing where the script is going, Nisa and this vampire, who is essentially like her bodyguard, knowing that the story will lead to the reveal that they're part of a group of vampires called the Blood Pact that were training to hunt Blade, knowing where the story is going, we're going to play it as they're not supposed to be fighting because they're here to deliver a message, but Nisa decides to engage Blade anyway, just to test his mettle. And it's unspoken, but it's the unspoken direction that all of their gestures looks mean when you're watching the scene. So you may not fully grasp what's going on, but for whatever reason, when the scene ends and you realize, oh, it's a beautiful woman under that mask, and oh, Blade's kind of looking at her long, and you realize this whole fight scene was a little bit like a dance, that you realize this is kind of their first dance. These two meet, but unlike the vampires and most humans who maybe meet at a bar or a club, in this case, for true warriors, their only way of meeting and having a successful kindling of their romance is to fight. So Del Toro builds in these directions. This is how he directs the actors and positions the situation to make the script make sense. Because what is Guillermo del Toro? He's the director, and the director is the master of presentation. Okay, that's not an official title, but I was just thinking about, what is an MC? I always wondered what that was for the longest time. It's the master of ceremonies, right? That's the guy who is kind of the host, kind of keeping the audience along until the musical acts perform and all that stuff going on. You always need a host who kind of controls the way the presentation is introduced. Well, the director is that on top of the guy who picks all the shots and picks all the talent. So the director is many different things, but as a master of presentation, if the script don't make sense, and this is an action movie, right? So the action, he already knows the action is still a part of the storytelling. I can't just have an action scene that's cool. There has to be consequences, and there has to be a reason that we get into the action. So vampires come to deliver a message. The script doesn't make sense. They're just attacking Blade for some reason. So through direction, now they do sneak in, they drop down. It is creepy, but Whistler shoots first. So bodyguard vampire has to disarm him and point a gun at him, but he doesn't shoot him. But that situation is enough for Blade to engage with his sword, and Nisa knows she's supposed to deliver a message. She's not engaging right away, so they have a stop, they have a pause. What's going on here? And then Nisa decides, nope, I'm pulling out my sword. I'm gonna test Blade and see how good he is. And so this is all direction, and you can tell it when you're watching it. That you can just tell that that's what's going on, but you can't just tell, right? That is direction. The director has to tell the actors, this is what's going on. This is your intention. This is where you're coming from. And so just communicate that through your performance as best you can, and then we chop it up and make sure that it moves right.